Welcome back, gentlemen. I am the host for our Dialogos today, and I thought the last one was amazing. And just to let everyone know, I'm sure everyone who's watching us most likely knows this already, but just to do a little bit of an introduction. So John, you know, there's so many things there's so many things that I can, so many different ways I could describe the ways that you've touched me, right? But I think the thing I'm most present to lately is I think I want to acknowledge the infinite, inexhaustible appetite you have for essentially what brought us together here and what we're talking about today. That realm, it's rare that it's rare that I encounter a being that has such appetite and endurance and an unrelenting hunger for the inexhaustible. And I think I know I am benefiting from that, and I know a lot of other people are benefiting that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Guy. That's a little bit overwhelming, but I appreciate the sentiment. Thank you very much.
Yeah, totally. And Zevi, we're just getting to know each other, but the thing that I'm enjoying, I'm going through a lot of your videos on your channel, and I'm quite impressed with your scholarship and your rigor.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And it's not just the good scholarship and the rigorousness per se, but what comes through to that for me in listening to you is a profound respect from who you study and where you come from and everything that you've gone through. There's a reverential, I hear a deep reverence in your scholarship and in the fact that you're so rigorous in that way, and a deep humility that I really comes through, and I'm really enjoying that about you. Oh, you're on mute. Unmute yourself. Uh-oh.
Can you hear me?
Now I can hear you. Yes.
Now we can hear
you. Very good. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. These ideas are ideas that I was raised with, and they weren't just abstract and theoretical. These were what I was taught as truth from the Word of God. And since then, my thinking has, gone a bit more down a scholarly route, and I've moved away from theology more towards philosophy. But I still find these ideas to be incredibly compelling, beautiful, and true, even if those things mean a new thing to me now. And I do see them as a path towards living better lives personally and collectively. So I'm really glad that reverence and scholarship both come through to the fore. So thank you, Guy.
Yeah, thank you. So let's dive in. So as we were talking about, we're gonna be putting into dialogue, right? Essentially, you could say reason, rationality, the dialogical, and the mystical. And when we were originally talking about that, there's what we want to do is we sense that there's a deep way that they mutually afford and dwell and enhance and reveal each other with one another. But there's also ways in which you can see historically them being pitted against each other, right, and discounting one another, right? And so I think what draws us together in some senses is finding the deeper ground in which if you want to put it like the deeper ground, the higher ground, the mode of being that these things represent, and bring them into dialogue, right, in our times, and playing off of, as the central figure for this, Martin Buber. And so I want to do like the structure of these is we're gonna like today. Last time John opened it up and presented some arguments, right, and got things rolling, and then we went into dialogue. So I'm going to do the same thing this time on specifically the dialogical in its relationship with Buber and Heidegger, and start to open up some horizons there that we can again, we're not trying to stay true to anybody or anyone's work, but we're kind of using Buber as a jumping off point, if you will, or Heidegger as a jumping off point for our own ideas. And then so next time you're gonna come in and Zevi is talk about the mystical. And so and then I would imagine we'll probably do another 3 more of those and just see where it takes us, right? And just to remember the ongoing discovering and listening to the logos and in this form the dialogos, right? Through logos, through, and listening to the logos, that the dialogos are those moments, right? Dialogos is not something, as John does a really good job of describing this, is not something that you can do, right? You can set up the conditions for it. You can set up the right postures and stances and attitudes, but ultimately, and this is what's interesting, I want to talk a little bit about this, just like the way that Buber talks about the I thou, right? The I thou is not something that you can do, it's something that happens, right? And you get the sense where it's kind of like you can plant the garden, but you can't make the plants grow. It's in some sense there's an element of grace there. And so when we talk about dialogos, what we're really referring to are those moments in the dialogical, in dialogue, right, where something lifts, right? We're not just talking about the product of the logos, but in some sense we all, there's moments where we go so deeply into what we understand with the logos that we in some sense identify with, and there's this lift up, and something becomes present that is greater than the sum of the 3 of us, right? And that's the ongoing articulation of the practice of dialogos, right? And so so what's really important around that are, as Heraclitus talked about it, talked about the logos as using the metaphor of the flame, of fire. And you can think about it, I enjoy thinking about it like the logs or something like the ideas or the propositions, right, of the fire. And you bring these together and you go into dialectic, right? And it's bringing these into relationship, and they rub together, and then something sparks and it lights up. And the flame, right, it's in something's released beyond it, but yet there's this is the thing that the thing about the flame is it's also deeply adhering to the form of the representation, right? It's a transformation, but it's outlining completely, right, the log. So there's a way in which the ideas and the rigor of it and the propositions are essential, right, to that lighting in some way, in some important way. So I want to just give a lot of respect to the people that we talk about and the propositions and all the historic, like the incredible wisdom that we're all standing on, right? That in some way, in ways that we understand, in ways that we don't understand, we are informed by, right, and given by here with this. So it's interesting. I just want to talk a little bit about, bringing Buber and Heidegger in dialogue a bit, right? And I've done a bit, like in this last couple of weeks, I've done a bunch of reading about their relationship and about other people kind of talking about the correlation between the two. And it's really interesting. In fact, I would say Buber's relationship to philosophers in itself is really interesting.
Yes.
And I've just gotten this sense with Buber I notice I find myself he's tricky because, and I think the way that he's tricky, right, in this regard is telling, is informative of the phenomena that what he's responding to, right? Because on some level he's discussing and taking up issues that are deeply philosophical, right? Like he's talking about essentially the ontological. He's talking about being. He's talking about the deeper structures of being, right? And he does it in some regard in a deeply philosophical way, but also in a very prosaic religious way as well, and in a poetic way. There's a place where it's very difficult to kind of pin him down into any particular category, and I think that that's really telling. And so I kind of want to say that, like, the way that I'm noticing I listen to Buber when I'm reading him is because if you listen to him like he's a philosopher per se, it's some of his stuff really kind of doesn't kind of hold all the way, right? So yet it still reveals something. So I don't think it's really right to think of him just as a philosopher. But I think what it's more I'm thinking of him is simply just as a deep thinker, and in many ways is like a sage kind of figure, of like a confrontation with modernity and secularism, and specifically nihilism. I think is what he was essentially responding to in a very, very deep way. Now, the work of Martin Heidegger, so a couple of things. In regards, what I can tell about when they addressed each other, one, they didn't even address each other a lot. Buber talked about Heidegger more than Heidegger talked about Buber. In fact, I think Buber referenced and talked about the thou. I don't think he really ever addressed Buber per se, but he addressed the thou. But both of their addresses, for the most part, my sense was that it wasn't really a real confrontation, right, with each other's work. It was mostly like a shallow or a misinterpretation of where they were coming from, right? So I don't think there's a whole lot, as far as I can tell, there wasn't a whole lot about their actual relationship in the direct dialogue with their work. I do think that Buber, some of criticisms from Buber about Heidegger is his neglect. He perceived a deep neglect of the thou, of the I thou structure. I think he thought that Buber and Being and Time, that it was way too much about the singular, right? About the one, right? About Dasein as an individual, and that it didn't account for the deep way in which the intersubjective, like the I thou relationships are fundamental for human beings, right? And I want to say that it's interesting because Heidegger is like, it's so hard to enter into Heidegger from, because Heidegger is notoriously a very difficult thinker, right? So I think that what I want to say is, what I want to propose, right, in this is that I think that in some way Buber is an opening, right, to develop something that may be underdeveloped in Heidegger, at least in Being and Time, right? And it's specifically the way in which authenticity in relationship, right, in the authentic mode, right, is, I think the I thou starts to get at the possibility for that opening, right, and to develop that. Now, Heidegger, in his work, talked about, he talked a lot about discourse, right? and it's specifically in its inauthentic mode, right? In idle talk, right? And he went a lot into that. And he also spoke of Meitzen, right? Which is a being with others, right? So to kind of get at it, and this is where I think both of them are deeply in very, very similar grounds, right? Is in some sense both of them saw and sought tried to think and articulate what cannot be thought and articulated by representational thinking, essentially, right? And in both of them, you can kind of see them both in a way responding to human life, to the world, to being, right? In such a way that they were both in some sense saying, like, you can't grasp being in some conceptual way, in some kind of like, you can't represent it, right? In that way, something is deeply lost. And the way that Heidegger starts to get at that in his primordial ways is in a lot of his terms in that he talked about, instead of talking about the human being, he referred to it as the being in the world, right? So Dasein, right, which translates as their being or being there, right? He starts to say, like, okay, human beings, right, are the being who in their being is already always in the world, right? And you start to realize in that sense that human beings, that the particularity of what makes us human, right, is this way that, in other words, I am not a being, right, that is then in the world. No, my very being is a being in the world, right? So it's like there's a deep relation. The whole thing is relationship, right? And all his uses of hyphens really exemplify and articulate that deep weddedness, this deep relationship, right? So you can kind of see there that if you start to try to understand the human being as and represent it as like with any kind of thinghood, you actually conceal what is most essential about us. And that what makes the human being a human being, right, from Heidegger's viewpoint, is precisely that we are the being, which is a concern. We are already always concerned for being, right? A famous thing with Heidegger is he says, like, human being is the being for which its being is a question to it, right? And so there's a way where Heidegger kind of starts to show that essentially that for the human being as such is always the issue. That's what it is to be a human being, is to be in a deep, deep concern for and with being. Now, in Being in Time, he talks about that. There's ways in which the human being can move away from its being in inauthenticity, right? And then there's ways that it can open to its being in authenticity. But it's essentially, you got to get this, it's all essentially about being. Now, the thing about, it's like a good example of this is, like, I think it's if you look at like the phylogenetic chain, right, of the chains of different kinds of beings, only in the human being does it say being, right? The human being explicitly. It doesn't say, right, you don't talk about like reptile being. You don't it's not explicit. And that's the case, it starts to get at our deep understanding in which, for us human beings, we dwell in language, right? We live and we dwell in horizons of meaning, right? That we're not so much a thing amongst other things that are just simply there, that we kind of bump up against and deal with. No, there's a way that where And I know neurobiology has really kind of shown this, right? That we don't respond to stuff, right? No, we respond to what the stuff is, right? It's what it means is what we're always responding to and what we're dwelling in. And so and you can kind of see the same kind of the same response in Buber in the way he's approaching things, and especially when he talks about the I thou and the I it as fundamental relations. And my understanding of Buber is he kind of said that, like, look, to be a human being is to always be in a relationship, and that you have two fundamental attitudes. You're either in a relationship, right, with a thou, or you're in a relationship with an it. And he said that that relationship is to be spoken as one word, right? So there's an I thou and there's an I it, that they're not two separate things that then come together, but they arise together, right? And those two fundamental attitudes, right, are what constitute the way the world discloses to us and how we deal with it, right? So that's really the important thing, is like, so when, you could say that for Buber, the I it is essentially looking around and having a relationship to the world such that my I stood over and against things as means to an end, right? Like, so basically looking at things in terms of basically being a means to my own ends, right? An I thou relationship, roughly spoken, is where what I am in a relationship with, I thou, right, is an end in yourself, right? And he talked about that the I thou are those moments where one is deeply, it's a deep encounter with with reality and a real presence, right? And that this encounter, right, in some sense is a place where, when he talks about it, it's like as if when you encounter the thou, it's as if the whole universe is in the grain of sand, right? There's this quality where, and you can really feel it's almost like a direct experience of the central thing of philosophy. Like you can really hear like the one and the many just coming together in an encounter of being, right? And I think that for Buber, he would say that that encounter is the most fundamental thing for us. It's the most fundamental experience, the most authentic experience, and it's at the heart of the matter. Now, my sense with that is, I sense that just like with Heidegger, with Buber as well, they're really essentially, I think what they were in response to was essentially, in their own ways, was to nihilism, right? I think that Buber was, in some sense, a very concerned, right? Very, very worried and concerned about that we were losing sight with where reality was. And specifically, my sense is that, and I think you talk about this, John, about in that part of the meaning crisis and in nihilism, where the numbing aspect of modernity, right? That kind of place where it's like things get really abstract, they lose their reality, everything is conceptualized, right? There's a way in which you don't really have you can't really touch anything real, but you kind of abstract and stand back and in an abstract way can understand everything instrumentally. And for Buber, I know there's many times where he's basically saying, look, and he wrestled a lot with mysticism. And in some sense, there's ways he talked about mysticism like this, right? And which I think it's a mistake, but there's also something there. But he was basically saying like, no, it's not about knowing the universe. We're never going to be able to stand up over and understand everything. And I think he sensed that there was something in the human being that was losing itself in attempting to be the highest throne, to be the knower of everything. And he would say things like, no, you can't, we can never stand above everything. That's not our job, right? That's not our destiny. Rather, our job in some sense is to deeply embrace things. It's in the embrace where we feel and are in contact with the immediacy of the whole, right? So it's this encounter, this deep relationship with reality, which what is most real, which is where Buber, I think, really highlighted and zeroed in on. Now, he had a kind of, one of his interesting things about philosophy and philosophers. There was one place, and I don't know who was in conversation with, but where he was asked about philosophers, and he said that, well, he basically says, like, there's no philosophy at this point that really accounts for the status of the I thou, right? In his view, what was missing in philosophical thinking, as far as he could tell, that there was no account that gave the primacy of the I thou ontologically its status, and is as much as he saw it, right? And he was, in some sense, he, in this quote that I read, in some sense, he's looking for it, but he said he hasn't seen a philosopher yet really give the I thou its ontological primacy, right? So that was his kind of dialogue, right, with his thinking around philosophers. So now coming back to Heidegger, first of all, how's all this sounding? You guys wanted to?
Yeah, it's good. I don't know if you want us to. You've already like germinated a whole bunch of things in my mind, but if you want to keep going for a bit, that's fine too. Which would you like to do?
Let's let's just start wrapping a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, well, because there was a lot there. That was really wonderful, and so much appreciated. So much. I was actually engaged. I was trying to note some stuff down, and you started and you circled back to a point which I'd like us to consider. Well, I'm going to make a couple of proposals of some threads, and perhaps try to weave them together as quickly as possible. One is, but I always want this to circle back to what's the relationship between Dialogos and mystical realization. Yep. So we're trying to help. I'm going to ask for your help to how to, these proposals, how can we weave them back towards that? In
that case, let me just kind of go get this one other thing I want to bring in there, and then we'll weave it together. Yeah, totally. So I really appreciate it. This is a great opportunity for me. I don't come from an academic background, so like this kind of formal way of presenting something and thinking about it is really an edge for me. So I'm appreciating this experience of doing this in kind of a formal way. So it's an edge for me. So I'm appreciating it a lot. So kind of coming back into Heidegger, right? For Heidegger, right? And I think the thing that's important to remember about Heidegger is that Being in Time isn't a book about human being, right? You remember, Being in Time, his seminal work was about death. It's a book about death, and it's really primarily about, and essentially, death as in some sense involved in the question of being, right? Which is central for human beings, because like human beings, you could say, is kind of the site where being itself, and in some sense, is both revealed and concealed, and thus to start to get at the question of being, he thought we should go through the human being, because that's the being in which that brings it forth as a concern, right? However, he really was not about an anthropology of human being, or really his intention wasn't to understand the human being per se. And that's the important thing to remember. So you kind of think about what he, like the directions he went in and what he developed. His purpose is like, that's what he's listening to. And that being said, you could say that, and this is where we start to get into, well, what are we doing in Dialogos? And especially if you look at it in terms of the fellowship in the human relational ground of Dialogos, right?
Mhm.
I think we can start to look at it is it something, one thing that it isn't, right? Or one way to look at it, what it isn't, is what I think Heidegger refers to as idle talk, right? And in idle talk, right, is that the way that the human being is inauthentic, right, is in using discourse, right, and conversation and talk, and you can get it with the term idling, which is basically just keeping the current normativity and interpretations and social practices of the culture, keeping them going, right, as a kind of sense where you're turning away from anything that is determinate, authentically determinate of our being, right? So it's kind of like this, the endless chit chat, right? The gossiping, the automaticity of the social milieu, this kind of quality of where and what's present when in idle talk is this kind of sense where it's as if what we're talking about, it's as if those things have some definite ground, right, that we're all standing on, right? And it in some sense it moves away from the real matter for human beings, in which we, in some sense, we dwell within language and interpretations, and that we are deeply standing, right, on a history that's constantly moving. So in some sense, you could say that idle talk is a way of just is keeping going a normativity that moves away from our death, right? The fact that that all the possibilities that human beings live into, right, is predicated and only comes into view on the ultimate horizon, for which all horizons address us, all possibilities address us, which is the possibility of impossibility, which is death, right? And it's really important to think about, and this is probably the most difficult thing I've noticed with Heidegger is that you got to remember, when Heidegger is talking about death, he's not talking about your demise. He's not talking about the event of your perishing, right? He's referring it to ontologically death, right? Ontologically, for death is something like, I think about it, it's like the domain of no thingness. It's in certain sense, like in some way, one of the things that Heidegger shows is how primary possibility is for human beings, right? And here you start to get into the deep temporality of being, which is, for us, we're always already being addressed and addressing and living into possibilities of being, right? And that all, including our past, right, our history, right, are given by, we talk about our history and our past, right, in terms of the possibility that we're living into, right? Even our past has a grounding in the futural, in the possible, and that makes a lot of sense, because one of the ways that I like to think about it is, an example of this is, like, for example, like, I haven't, not once this morning have I given any thought or put any energy into how can I walk through that wall without making a hole in it, right? Because it's just not possible, right? It's not, it lives for me as not possible. However, if somehow in this conversation, you could light up for me the possibility that there's a way to walk through that wall, right, without making a hole, I guarantee you that's all I'd be thinking about, right? So there's this way in which any kind of action, any kind of address, any way that life moves in me for the human being always presupposes that something's possible, that there's an open possibility that I move for, right? Therefore, interpretation, language, these deep historical understandings of being through time, as those change, right? Like as those change and deepen and unfold, new possibilities open up for being, right? Now, I think what Heidegger would say is one of the is like deep insights is he really started to hear that, well, the only reason, right, what all of that can, like, possibility can only open up for us as a horizon, right? If on some level the horizon of the possibility of impossibility, it's like that is like it's death is you could say is in some sense the ground, right, for which possibilities are able to address us in the first place, right? So our relationship to death, so authenticity is really what he calls a being towards death, right? It's a real kind of like, in some sense, it's like deeply moving into your finitude. Now, the important part of this is that that doesn't mean that in authenticity that you're thinking about dying all the time. No, it's this, I would say it's this fundamental relationship of this towards which we move towards, and in some sense death kind of like we move into our we move forward into our future, and our own finitude in a certain sense pushes us back and stands us up, and the world occurs to us, right, in its facticity in which we grapple. So for Heidegger, the more you're in an authentic relationship to your finitude is in some sense is the more in which you're in your sense of being here is genuinely grounded in no thingness, right? That it's that things aren't just given, but there's a way that things are open for you, and you're in a deep conversation with being, right? And living in that way. So so you can see, like, in authenticity, this has a lot to do with really a deep like, in some sense, turning toward and being open to a deep mystery, right, as the very ground of what and who we are, right? Really the question that we are for ourselves, right? Now, this is what I want to say, is that I think that Buber, now, in Being in Time, Heidegger, as far as I understand, he does not develop discourse in the authentic mode. And I have a feeling that Buber, he is the possibility of actually what he's pointing to is what discourse and dialogue, right, can be in the authentic mode. And so in other words, what is discourse when it's not idle talk? What is discourse, right, when it's a turning toward, right, our own our own mortality, our own finitude, right, the possibility of impossibility, the no thingness. And so I have a feeling that that I think Buber is really right in this way, right, of that there are ways, you know, as far as I can tell, man, I don't even think you can think about being a human being without, like, a human being is a being with others. I mean, relationships are so primary all the way down. I mean, my wife right now, she's pregnant, and he's due in about a month, and there's it's like I'm watching him grow and become more differentiated in her belly. Like he's emerging from and inside a whole another human being, and my wife's taking my hand and putting it on, and he's like, I can feel his hand underneath it, and there's this kind of sense in which it, it's so it's so miraculous, right? But it's so deeply relational all the way down, right? And so, and there's also this sense in which, as he's birthed, I feel this innate call to him. And that call seems to be predicated on this deep understanding, right? Of that who I am to him, right? Is in who we are to him, right? He's going to become in and through that relationship with us and his community. And this will go on for the rest of his life. So there's a sense where I want to kind of look at what is the role, right, of relationship within authenticity, and specifically what's going on in terms of death, right, and intimacy, and being with another in a profoundly open way, right, in an authentic way. It's like there's a big, and I think that there's something here, and I want to put little islands here that we can kind of weave together, right? But there's, to be deep, to have deep connections with other people really requires it as a testimony to being vulnerable, right? And in some sense, I think that there's this relationship to death in authenticity versus the relationship to death and inauthenticity is the difference between turning towards something in vulnerability, right? Death turning towards it in vulnerability, which evokes something like wonder. Whereas in inauthenticity, in some sense, it's a denial or turning away from death, which opens you to something like exposure and horror. And I think that there's something there, right, about vulnerability that's afforded in a relationship, right? And that in some sense, that there's a way where in deep authenticity, and especially the way that relationships and conversations can be so transformative, right? In some way that's got like, there's a sense in which we're open, there must be some way where we are in some deep way, I am in some sense vulnerable and in some sense opening my death to your death. Like there's something going on there with vulnerability and mortality and the no thingness of that seems to be in the very guts of our being, right? That we're enacting in conversation in its authentic mode when it's authentic, right? That seems to afford dialogos, right? So that's the thinking I've been doing the last couple of weeks, or last weeks as we talked.
Very rich thinking, very rich. I'm gonna try. I'm not gonna be able to do justice to everything you said. It was almost, and I mean this as a compliment, it was almost an ode to the Heideggerian conception of our relationship to being within authenticity. I'll always put a space there so people don't mishear me.
Yeah.
So let me try and pick up on a couple of the threads. I think there's a deep connection between our mortality. I sometimes like to use the word fatality better than mortality because we associate fatality today with death, but it actually means being subject to fate.
Yeah.
And I think the ancients were better to see the term as the issue is fatality, not mortality.
Yeah.
Right. And the idea, the what that means is
Interesting.
that we are always, my language is not going to be clear here, but we're always subject to the way, we're always subject to fate. And I don't mean like some cosmic destiny pulling strings. What I mean is there are ways in which we will be confronted by the world that undermine our sense of our self-sufficiency in being. So, right, and I think this is the thing that Heidegger is trying. So, like, and you can see the Stoics playing around with this, right, about trying to cultivate sort of an existential self-sufficiency in the face of the fact that we're not ontologically self-sufficient, right? That we are not, and the ego's great pretense is that it's self-sufficient sui generis, right? And so I think part of what, and you pointed to that, what's going on in idle talk is it's self-sufficient. The normative structure, the structures, they're all self-sufficient. They're sui generis. Let's just keep them going. They're perpetual. We will perpetuate them. And we're losing the sense of the fact that we are all subject to fatality, which right, is again the sense that we are fundamentally ontologically not self-sufficient. And that means our meaning projects are precisely valuable because they are always under threat. The first noble truth, right? Remember that everything is threatened by dukkha. Everything. There is no place you can turn where dukkha will not find you. There is no place, there is no refuge where you will find the self-sufficiency, the sui generousness of what the ego wants. Now, notice what you then I think you were saying, Guy, is where are the places where we acknowledge and recognize, I'm splitting that up to play on the words, the fact that we are not self-sufficient and sui generis. I think that's the Dialogos mode. And that's why we can enter into Dialogos mode, not only with other people, but with other beings. Because part of what I think we're saying is, right, when I'm I-itting things, I'm acting as an autonomous, self-sufficient being, and it's going to manipulate things. And again, we need to do that. And I want to talk a little bit about that because, right, I want the proper ambivalence towards the I-it. But to come back, right, whereas when I'm doing I thou, notice what I think, if I'm hearing you right, you're saying about Heidegger and Buber, right? I am the being whose being is in question. Now notice what that has the two aspects. My being is in question. So a question is a lack. It is a disclosure that you are not self-sufficient. If you were self-sufficient, you would never ask a question. And notice that a question is inherently dialogical.
Yes.
Right. And so I have to enter into that mode in order to do what? In order to properly, right, acknowledge and recognize my non-self-sufficiency in my relationship to you. And you also relate back to me in that way. And then the possibility opens up, what I heard you saying, and this is the mysticism of Eckhart coming through. I think Buber's wrong, by the way. I think Eckhart is the I-thou philosopher. Right? The same eye by which I see God is the eye by which he sees me. If that isn't an I-thou relationship, I don't know what it is, right? And so that strikes me very, very powerfully, because that's deep, that's mutual, I don't know, mutual disclosure, mutual conformity, like, right? Anyways, the point is, I hear Gelesenheit all the way through, the letting be. Now, the letting be is often misunderstood as a passive sort of, resignation or acceptance. It's not that. It's that if I can come into properly realizing myself as the being whose being is in question, lacking self-sufficiency, already therefore necessarily in Dialogos, right? And see that you are too, then I think we can find authenticity in this way. I'm trying. Namely, what exactly you said Heidegger does. Heidegger is not giving a philosophical anthropology. When I'm doing I, thou with you, I'm not entering into psychology or anthropology. Instead, I'm trying to do what Heidegger is trying to do in Being and Time. I'm trying to, right? I'm trying to see through your human being what being is.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to afford you to do the same.
Right.
But notice that, but see, we have to be really careful here. That is not some abstraction away from your being.
Yeah.
That is not, oh, you're just a sign or a symbol. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying like that you are, like you said, the whole universe, right? Right. All of being is in this being. Yeah. And this being is particularly apt, and I'm particularly apt for them, precisely because they are the being whose being is in question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like we open ourselves up to that possibility in a way that other things cannot. Now, it doesn't mean that other things are not subject to fatality, and because this is the other deep insight. Insofar as everything is subject to the fatality of time, which it is, everything is also radically insufficient in its presencing, right? It's shining in phenomena, and it's withdrawing beyond, right? Everything is like that. Everything
shining in beyond. Yeah.
Well, everything. I'm trying to get on the fact that while the human being is, I'm really worried about my adjectives here. I want to say it has a kind of firstness for us in that it's like you said, where the child first comes to this in the dialogical attachment with the parent and then with the friends. But once we start to be tutored in that or educated in that, I think it's possible, again, like you said, right? We do Dialogos.
Yeah.
We are able to enter into that. I can appreciate the fatality of the flower and the mountain. And one is much briefer than I, and the other is much longer than I. And that bookends my fatality and opens me to a transhuman notion of what that fatality is like. And that opens me up to a depth to things that I'm not otherwise wouldn't have access to. Yeah. So that's my way of trying to weave together what I was getting from you about mortality, its relationship to Dialogos, and then to foreground a possibility of how that can broach into a mystical realization, insofar as I can move to realizing the fatality of the flower and the fatality of the mountain, which again is not just it's not just the event of their demise. Yeah. It's their radical their non-self-sufficiency, but nevertheless the fact that they are here. They are radically here.
Yes.
Right? There's a mystery to the fact that we are radically non-self-sufficient and nevertheless we are here. Like, can you hear that? I mean, it's like, right. Yes. How is that? Because we want to either be, no, I'm a block of stone that will not change for all of time, or I'm a nothing, right? And Nagarjuna talked about, can you get between that kind of substantialism and that nihilism to properly realize yourself and to realize all things. Yeah. So there, that I'm going to stop. That was too much, but that's my best sort of initial response.
Awesome.
I'm really intrigued to hear what Zevi has to say now too.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so many rich themes that have been raised here. We would have to write an encyclopedia between the three of us to begin to address them.
That's next week.
But next week is I was really trying to sit in and listen to what was beneath the language, that which language can't express, that was coming both from you, John, and Guy. And to relate it to my thoughts in preparation to this and the time leading up to this and the possibilities going forward from this. It's almost like there's infinite possibilities and formulations and way of articulating it, which itself is crippling, and we have to somehow strike in the dark and say something in response to being and in response to the presence of others, which you guys have so kindly shared with me. So we'll try to say something. To go back to something that that guy mentioned right in the beginning when you began to talk, was how Buber is not necessarily the philosopher's philosopher, the way that perhaps Wittgenstein is, and the philosophers perhaps don't even see him as a philosopher, and he has some disdain for the other philosophers. And there's a deep element of, I think, two other P's that run through him, which is the poet and the prophet.
Yeah.
Prophet, yeah.
And the poet, he has a lot of debt to Nietzsche, who he was very touched by as a teenager. And to the prophets, he has a lot of debt to the prophets of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, which he deeply was moved by and saw himself as a prophetic character, along with his colleague, Abraham Joshua Heschel, who was another living prophet of the day. I was actually just chatting with someone in the coffee store, and they were talking about how there's the complexity of the issues that face us as society and as humanity are so daunting and overwhelming that if you try and run sort of like a game theory analysis of what's the best shot for our survival, what comes out of the computation is simply that we need a prophet. We need someone who can come and speak truth in a way that will be seen as true by everyone, that we can get behind. And the challenge is that we're not very kind and welcoming epistemologically to prophets here in 2021. But I see Buber as trying to play that role of prophet and poet, and I don't see his philosophy as being a work of analytical precision, of splitting hairs and cutting terms. It's his poetry, his philosophy, his prophecy is to evoke within us a feeling that when we turn to the beings that surround us, we can see them as inherent and fundamental and essential and necessary, and as sui generis, and as things which are, as John so beautifully said, the things that have their fate baked into them from the scale of the flower to the placing us in that scale in between. And if he can evoke us to approach to it, there's the strange thing that goes on with humans. And John can tell you the neurology of this, and Guy can tell you the dialogical side of this, but there's a strange thing that happens where we all share fundamental truths that are undeniable and unavoidable. We all know that we're going to die, right? We all know that the things that really matter most in life are not the things that are like the size of the bank of our bank account, or how fast our car can drive. Like, these are not the things that will matter when we're on our deathbed. And we know as well, being modern people, we know that like the earth is a tiny speck of rock hurling and spinning through space. God knows how fast and where and why, and that it's all going to come to an end. And yet we know those things, and those are undeniable, and you don't need to be a religious person to believe those things. These are just standard, scientific mainstream narrative that everyone's behind, and yet we live our lives in a detachment to that sense of time, to that subspecies eternitatis, to use Spinoza's language, and we sink ourselves within another mode of being, which Buber would call the I-it, where we're obsessed by how we're being perceived, and what do the people around me think of me, and what's she gonna say, and what's he gonna say, like things that we know are totally insignificant, and we see how those things perpetuate systemic abuses of the self and of others and the planet. And there's some sort of Heideggerian shift and this Berian shift that we need to make from just this being thrown around and waking up and checking our phone and seeing who liked our last post and going to bed with our phone still in our hand, and seeing a shift towards living deeply, towards living in that Dasein sense, and towards the I-you relationship, where we can really cherish the humanity and the depth, the divinity in each thing. And I don't know if it was Guy or John who said that to experience the thou of the other is to experience what it's like for them, what it's like to be human from their perspective. And when we do that, when we're able to encounter people and experience their humanity, our own humanity is inherently enriched. And when, on the converse, when we see people as simply, means to an ends or ways to push our own agendas, our humanity is diminished. And we know this to be true. So what interests me when we're talking about mysticism and dialogue is how does dialogue, as John has been asking, forward mystical realization in a way that our own humanity can be most appreciated and most realized in the collective humanity which we take ourselves as to be a part of, and not to be lost in the simple shiny tricks that have us enslaved by our own psychology and chemistry. So that's really what I want to know. How does dialogue move us to what John, what Guy have been referring to as a transformative mystical experience, for that Heideggerian and Buberian project to happen?
So can I just want to, I'm going to propose an addendum to that question, or just something I want to add to it. I think it genuinely is a way of adding to the question. Guy's made a very good argument that Heidegger in a way needs Buber. I think that was very well argued. I think what you just pointed to, Zevi, and the shift that is needed. I'm wondering if Buber needs Socrates. I'm wondering if Buber needs Socrates in the same way that Heidegger needed Buber. Like, what we need somebody who, like, and because it's interesting, because I wrote those same three things down. I wrote prophet, poet, and philosopher, Zevi. So like we were like, yeah, for sure. Because, and I was thinking of Socrates, because I'm reading these books and they're making the argument that Plato moves him in and out of these various roles in a constant fashion. So that is, he moves Socrates in and out of these roles. What I mean is, the thing about Socrates is that Socrates is atypos, and then and Kierkegaard really got this about Socrates, and he also claimed it about Jesus too. But that Socrates is atypos, he's atypical, but not like but not in just a weird way, right? He can introduce aporia into you. Yeah. He can sort of get all of that machinery, the idling machine. He throws a wrench into the idling engine of Das Man, of the everyone, of the everyday. He throws a wrench into that. He wrenches it open, if you'll allow me to play with that a little bit, and makes it. There's a metanoia that seems to be presupposed in order to enter into Dialogos. And then, so what I'm trying to get at is there's a metanoia that affords you getting into Dialogos, yeah, that bears some relationship to what you're asking, Zevi, which is, what's the metanoia that's actually afforded by Dialogos? And I think those two metanoias are not separable from each other. I think the metanoia that shifts us into Dialogos has an important relationship to the way the metanoia that is realized within Dialogos. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? And I'm trying to phrase that as the question is, just like Heidegger needs Buber, does Buber need Socrates?
Can you just,
because Plato has this
metanoia again, just real quick. I just want to make sure I know what do you mean by metanoia again?
So metanoia is the term. It's a Greek term. It's taken up as being a central thing within Christianity. But the problem is, because of that taking up by Christianity, we have to be careful, because we'll hear it only in Christian words.
Right.
So it's often translated by various terms, but conversion or turning, right? But the word metanoia means something in the Greek is more profound. So noesis is the kind, it's what I would properly say, it's the perspectival knowing. It's the knowing what it's like to be here. It's the kind of knowing that comes into salience when you have insight. Yep. In fact, one of the best translations for noesis is noticing, yeah, right? And so metanoia is to go beyond noesis, to move to that which is beyond, either beyond in the sense that affords it, or beyond it in the sense that transcends it. So beyond in both ways, typically. So it's this fundamental transformation of your, if you'll allow me just a little bit of my language, it's a fundamental transformation of your salience landscaping. You can see it in when Paul when when he's doing the great hymn to agape, he said, you know, when I was a child, I used to think like a child and speak like a child. And then I became a man and I put the childish things beside. What he means is, you think about what's salient and important and relevant to you when you're a child, and what's salient and important to you as a man, as an adult, right? Sorry, I didn't mean to be sexist there. I got caught up in his language. Sorry. And so, right, that's metanoia. And so what I heard Zevi saying is, right, there's a fundamental kind of metanoia that has to occur in order to wake us up to the real possibility of Dialogos. And then following you, Guy, that has to wake us up to the real possibility within us, the fact that we are not ultimately self-sufficient, like etc. And but then the properly denoted referent of Zevi's question was, what is also the metanoia? What is also the metanoia, the mystical realization afforded by Dialogos? And my point is, I think those two are bound together. Plato clearly represents the aporia that Socrates introduces at the beginning as somehow one with the realization of the good at the end. Those two are bound together in some way. And I see Dialogos like as marrying, that's the word I want to use, as marrying those two together.
Yeah.
So I'll stop. That's what I wanted to. First of all, I want to make sure, Zevi, are you okay with that addendum? Because like I don't want to be overwriting what you said. I wanted to try and respond to it and develop it.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate asking. I think it's a beautiful addition to it, and I like pulling Socrates into the discussion, because when you pull in Socrates, you're necessarily pulling in Plato and Plotinus and you're dragging a whole tradition in with him. And we have, someone else said earlier that we're sitting on foundations of wisdom, and it's upon us to drag them into the conversation to be most effective in what we're trying to achieve. So thank you for dragging in the Greeks.
And the Greeks are, of course, famous. All of Greek tragedy is about, one way, sorry, that's too bold. One important way of dimension seeing within Greek tragedy is, right, the Greeks are constantly reminding us that we are godlike, but thoroughly mortal, right? That's why the tragic hero can be the tragic hero. And I think Aristotle's right about this. If Oedipus wasn't godlike, then his mortality, his subject, notice it's not his death, it's his fatality, wouldn't matter to us so much. It's precisely because it's the tension between the godlikeness and the fatality, right, that is so pregnant in Greek tragedy. And I think Nietzsche picked that up. And so bringing in the Greeks does bring back this way of trying to understand the deep connections. And Plato said all of philosophy is a preparation for death, in that sense. Sorry, I'm talking too much. Go ahead.
There's a couple of things. I'm enjoying what it's in this conversation. What in the last number of moments I've noticed, like, oh, okay. In order to understand what's being spoken and hear it, noticing I feel this kind of dropping in one sense and a turning towards something deep. Like I just feel kind of a deepening and like a silence, almost a quietness almost in me in doing this, because I feel there's things that aren't in view that I can feel, that are just present, and that's just my experience of what's happening. But this just the way, in the sense of okay, so like there's nothing like conversations where insight can happen, right? Like it in some sense,
Guy, could you be a little bit more precise about that? What do you mean? I mean,
yeah,
you can have profound insights outside of conversation.
Yeah,
like,
just in this quality of, right, just in there is something about conversation right? Where I've seen it over and over and over again, especially in circling, and we've experienced, I mean, everybody's had this experience of where, like somebody, you speak and somebody hears more than what you just said, and it's more true than what you just said, right?
Yeah.
This, that. What's
Yeah.
that?
Well, for me, that's Hermes in the sense of, you know, the psychopomp of participation, right?
Yeah.
He's the thief that's always stealing from us, right?
Yeah.
That's mine. Actually, it's not yours, right? That's
Yeah.
Hermes, right? Right. It actually belongs to the gods, right? And
Yeah.
right, yeah. For me, I see that, and I don't mean this in any supernatural sense, but I see that's sort of the divine aspect of the logos, what you just put your finger on. And for
Mhm.
me, right, and I don't mean this perniciously or with resentment, or if I do, I want to aspire beyond it. That's a little death.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of fate, because I had the proposition was destined this way, and
That's
you
really
went
important.
right, and that's fate. But what? Right. And yet the thing is, it's not like a nightmare in
Right.
which things fall into chaos. It's fate beyond me,
Yeah.
but you get what I'm trying. It's a little
Yeah.
death, but it's a little death that's it. But I'm just going to stop, because I'm just fumbling and marring it by
Well,
trying to speak.
in that sense where, like, you know, I know that the way that death is, you know, the way Heidegger talks about death is it's got this quality of where this withdrawal, right, where something comes into being through its simultaneous withdrawal, this unconcealment, revealment. So there's this quality of just the Alethean sense of truth that I think in dialogue really dwells in, is this quality of that there's when something's unconcealed, it's something else withdraws, right? They mutually afford this this coming, you know, this
Yeah,
this way
death
where
opens up.
yeah, and in some sense this back and forth between concealment and unconcealment in this turning, right, that seems to evoke this conversation. With the conversations an act seem to and I think this is perhaps starts to get at the no thingness, the ontological kind of death presence, is that what starts to, the ineffable starts to become like a presence in the dialogue, right? It doesn't become said, but this back and forth, and where you have a position and you are so clear about it, and someone hears more than that position, and that position is somehow undone,
Yeah.
right? And then, but yet there's a way where the participation in that movement, in that back and forth, somehow allows the unsayable to be present without being said, right? And this is this kind of tension with Dialogos, because on some sense it's a strange thing of essentially we're using words and language to reveal what cannot be represented in some sense, right? So this back and forth, and this the presence of the concealed, right, of the mystery, right, of the ineffable that we can kind of dwell in. This back and forth, I think, affords a lot of this, and it also, I think that there's something about this, and here's the developmental part of it, right? The way that relationships are so crucial to our development as human beings, right? In some sense, is that there's the content of what the conversation is about, But then there's what we're enacting, right? These little deaths, these my most precious propositions, right? Like the way
I
I
like
see
that.
myself, right? Like all those things that I maybe unknowingly are attached to and identified with, and then you say this one thing and the whole thing goes, right? And there's like a kind of a death. But there's also the revelation, right, of the non-represented, right, in that moment. There's an enactment that somehow affords me to be able to proactively be open for and even desire what is insecure, would look insecure, like it be something really insecure that I would be defended against, right? There's something I want to kind of get at like this presence, the way vulnerability.
But yeah, that's it. I think you were helping me, because where I fell into the rubble of words, right? Like when either of you or both of you, like, I like that. Here's my precious proposition, and you both go, but look, bleh, and that was not. But it's not just this way, because that was always there, and so the proposition is born from within me, something deeper than John, right? That's what I was trying to get by. You don't just explode it. I don't quite like that metaphor. It's like you take the seed and bring it to fruition, and I didn't realize that fruit was there. But then when I realized it, I realized, oh, that was all. I'm thinking this is like the sensibility transcendence that Wright talks about. That was in me, but not. It was in me, but not as me.
Yeah.
And that's what I was trying to convey with the little death. It's not just the shock of fate. It's also that deeper, that came from something deeper than the author of the precious proposition.
Right. And that deeper, is it fair to say that deeper is also another way of saying closer, like closer in,
deeper,
into more
closer,
intimate.
but it's an intimacy, but it's an intimacy that transgresses the ego's Cartesian intimacy with itself. It's not that kind of intimacy. It's not the intimacy of the cogito. It's not the intimacy of my consciousness's presentation to itself. It's a deeper, it's a thing like, oh, outside of that, beyond that, there was something. So it goes from I'm the author of the thought to I am the vehicle of the thought. That's how sort of. That's what I'm trying to get. And that's what so I'm trying to say that there's not, the death isn't just a loss, it's a metanoia. I go from being the author to the vehicle.
Yeah.
Does that land?
Yeah, it does for me.
I want to hear what Zevi has to say too.
Yeah, I like the way that we're talking about death in this way, because we were talking about death before as the ultimate, the absolute, the fate to which the grand equalizer at the end. But I was thinking that, like, we've all died 10,000 times, and we're constantly dying, and the things that we hold on as our precious propositions that we think that we are, those identities that we have, they're pulled away from us, and we have to, those are lost, and there's a new one that comes. I want to maybe throw in a touch of some classic metaphysics of mysticism at this point, which is that I'll use the language of the Jewish tradition, but it's really ubiquitous. This point is very basic to world mysticism. In the Kabbalistic tradition, we speak about the state of existence as moti v'le moti, as present and not present, being and not being. There's a sense of this pulse where things come into being and fall out of being, and because we see things at a certain frame rate, we don't see that sort of flickering in and out of existence that all of existence partakes of, or at least all of existence, all of created existence, all of existence emanated existence. There's the sense, like, when you're watching a movie, what you're essentially seeing is like 30 or 60 frames per second, depending on what it is, and the eye like doesn't see that, so it just makes, it's like when you flip those old flip books where you have those little sketches, you see it looks continuous. So reality looks continuous to us, but from the standpoint of the metaphysics of mysticism, reality is coming in and out, and what that is being in nothingness, constantly constantly flickering. There's this optical illusion where if you take if you draw a ball on one side of a paper or like a cardboard, and you draw a fish on the other side. We did this as kids. Then you put a rubber band and you tighten up and you release it and you spin it. If it spins fast enough, it looks like the fish is in the bowl,
Yeah,
like
right.
both sides. It's a very fun trick. So there's this sense where being and nothingness are so interconnected and so spun, and both our own senses, where our own affirmations, right, that can be said, right, is being, and that which cannot be said, the ineffable, is death, in some senses. That same relationship here. And in conversation, and you can see this happening here, we're constantly flickering through the ineffable and the ineffable, and that itself is what gives rise to the conversation, which is, it's not just a conversation of what's that term? It's the cataphasis. We're not just flowing out positive affirmation, just claiming things, and neither is it just the cataphasis, just like saying, oh no, we can't do this. It's this merger of the cataphatic and the apophatic, which is, I think, in some senses what the metanoia is. This turning back. It's the revolution. It's the revolving that self and being does constantly with non-being and death. And yeah, I hate to make any lines and comparisons to quantum physics, because I'm not a scientist, I'm not a physicist, but you'll have to ask a quantum physicist. I think there is some sort of even scientific truth to the sense that sort of there's a flashingness, there's a coming in and out of reality, of the basic strata of reality itself. But maybe I'll put that physics point leave that for the physicists. But certainly psychologically and metaphysically and linguistically, I see that happening here, and I see that it's interesting because metanoia, and maybe I'll just end on this one linguistic point. Metanoia in the Greek has a very rich and ripe parallel to the Hebrew, which is tshuva, to return. It's interesting as well. I mean, it's very hard for me to not think as a Jewish thinker. I'm so deeply entrenched.
We don't want that. We don't like.
I appreciate that. And then, so thinking about these Greek terms and the Greek prophets, someone like Socrates in relation to the Jewish prophets, and thinking about someone like Heidegger in relationship to Buber. I mean, it's like it's if someone that doesn't know history, the Greeks and the ancient Israelites and the Jews weren't exactly best of friends. They didn't really get along historically. And for someone who knows the modern history, the Germans and the Jews didn't either exactly get along. And Heidegger may be more representational of that than any German, or any random German, I should say. So it's interesting to think about how old enemies, and not just enemies in a material sense that they have wars, but epistemological, but like real ontological, metaphysical, philosophical enemies, how those visions can unite. And I think that's a messianic vision of how they can unite to flower something which is more beautiful than either of them independently. And it's the same way that being and nothingness, the same way that life and death have to unite to flower dialogue, to flower conversation. And I'm not saying that one is nothingness and the other is being. I'm not making any labels here. I'm not trying to be disparaging at all. But the very sense of the combination of antinomies, the coincidentally oppositorum, that can birth something. So the Hebrew term for metanoia is tshuva, which means to return, but it's tshuva is to return to God, to the hay, to being itself. Which is an interesting idea. So that's I'm just jazzing and riffing with what's coming up here. But I think the central theme of this constant deep relationship, that we're constantly dying and being reborn. We're constantly being and non-being. We're constantly saying and unsaying, is what I'm experiencing there.
So just to pick up on the physics for you a little bit, Zevi, Greg Enriquez and I are reading together, and Greg has gone a deep dive into the physics. We're reading Eastman's book, Untangling the Gordian Knot, which is basically taking sort of really cutting edge Whiteheadian philosophy of science, Epperson and others, and basically making an argument, a sustained critique that what quantum mechanics and relativity are pushing us towards is the death of actualism, which is the equating of real to actual, and that we have to now acknowledge real possibility as a reality, not just as a nominalist projection, not just as a mathematical thing, but as equally real as actuality, and that you have to see reality as constantly in the act of realization, which is the relationship between actuality and potentiality.
Yeah.
So kind of a Whiteheadian spin, I would almost say like Neoplaton on some Neoplatonists on the Aristotelian thing. But what I heard, if that jives, and I think that work is really quite impressive, by the way, the integration of the Whiteheadian with sort of the current philosophy of science. I heard you saying that at the heart of being is Dialogos.
Yeah.
This
I heard that
Dialogos
too.
between, I heard, but between right, between being and nothingness, or the way the West has, I think, framed it, but also misframed it, actuality and possibility, right? And then getting them back into an actual dialogical, like that's what I heard you saying. I heard you saying that Dialogos has the possibility for mystical realization, for putting us into enacted conformity with the very dialogical structure of being. That's what I heard you saying. And that to me is a deep argument about the relationship between Dialogos and mystical realization. Does that land with you? Have I heard you fairly?
Yeah, I think there's something very profound coming out, which is that the same thing that's happening in dialogue, in language, in deep conversation, in the relationship between that which cannot be said and that which is said, is parallels and deeply mirrors the relationship of reality, which is the dialogue between being and nothingness. And I think a third part to add on to here is that life itself, right? The Socratic and the Heideggerian project is life lived towards death, means, as far as I understand this, it's that life is only fully lived when the cognizance of our own fatality is realized in every single moment.
Yes.
So
yes.
the constant the deep interlocking, the deeper dialogical interlocking between life and death, between the effable and the ineffable, and between being and nothingness, are three things that happen together, and which is why perhaps conversation itself is participatory or reflecting of some structure of being and life itself.
And the thing about listening, right? The listening dimension of this, right? It harkens back to hearkening. And hearkening, my understanding, etymology really stood for a kind of like a profound obedience, right? If you think about that, like I'm getting that sense of there's something about that watching, and this is something I've noticed with when we in circling, it's a lot about listening. So we train people in deep listening and all that. But what's interesting about listening is listening happens when you realize that you don't. Like that's actually when listening starts, right? Is that like until you hear that you don't hear, like hearing doesn't begin. And I think that continually happens. And I think it speaks to that moment where it's flickering in and out, because it is, you kind of zero in on something and then you're like, oh, that's it. And then all of a sudden it becomes closed and then it shatters and then something else opens up and you realize it was present the whole time. And I just get this sense of like, oh yeah, this way that listening to another and this deep obedience to some, like the thing that you're actually conforming with is this movement itself. And then I was thinking about like, then the Gestalt sense of that, where, and this is what's also really interesting to me about conversations, is that when I think back on conversations, they're like little universes, right? They're little worlds, right? That have their own telos and like atmospheres and time and temporality. Like they're little universes, right? We all become that, having a one-ment with, right? So you come out of a conversation and you realize, oh, whoa, we were totally with something that I didn't even realize it. It has that quality to it. And I'm wondering about, and I wonder if this starts to bring into the way that which we're most obedient to, right? That deep obedience to that which can't be represented, right? That ineffable, as we listen to it, and as it gestalts, it's the we, right? That sense of the we space, as I heard it's called, or collective intelligence, or the becomes kind of like this third factor, right? That starts to have where we become, where it's almost like where I start out speaking, right? And then you listen, and then we speak, and then something emerges, and that starts to give us, right? Where it's not so much us giving it, but it starts to kind of form, that universe forms, and then it's more than the sum of all of us. And I'm wondering, right? I'm just kind of bringing all this in dialogue here, and the circling around it.
Nice self-reference there. That was great. I like that last little thing you just did. That was beautiful. See, did you see what he just did? For those of you who are interested in circling, Guy just said, we're exemplifying circling. We're circling around it, and we're circling with each other. And right, and those two are in conformity with each other. That, for me, that was a gem of a moment. And for me, that's the thing I want. We're running out of time, but I want to quickly bring up this notion of obedience, because I've been reading Schindler's book. You have too, been a guy on Plato's Critique of Impure Reason, and the chapter where he's talking about how Socrates is obedient to the good and to the logos, and here's where I want to use Tillich, because you can think of three kinds of obedience. We can think of what he calls heteronymous obedience, where there's an external thing that compels us, right? And then we can think of autonomous, and you can think of Kant here. It is my duty to do this, and it's completely. And then he has the theonomous, as that which transcends both the heteronymous and the autonomous, and I think that's what you're pointing to. You're not pointing to, I'm doing this because I'm compelled, for example, because we're all circling, and there's all these normative constraints, and I'm just doing it because I'm right. I don't. What will people think of me if I don't? That's heteronymous. Or there's I have a duty, I have a responsibility, I have to do that, right? I have to do the right thing. That's not it. Instead, right, the theonomous is what Frankfurt calls a voluntary necessity. What the heck's a voluntary necessity? And Frankfurt says that's the best definition of love. Love is a voluntary necessity, right? Because you are simultaneously beholding to something beyond yourself, yet you feel that you are actively choosing it and endorsing it. Like when you're in love with somebody, they're not just imposing themselves on you, and you're not just acting in duty towards them. It's beyond both of those. And so, I think the love you're speaking of here, right, is the obedience you're speaking of here is the obedience that is born out of love, right? And this takes us to Philia Sophia. There's a love for that profound metanoia of this deep conformity that is drawing us in a particular way. And that's what I'm feeling when I get into these. I'm feeling I'm being drawn into a conformity at a very deep level. It's not even so much in what I'm seeking. It's saying it's in the way I'm enacting, the way I'm showing up, and that for me, that reciprocal opening, the motivation to follow is the motivation to follow it, disciple, to follow it is love, and it's a kind of love, and that's something I think that's where it overlaps again with what Zevi is. He's taken on the role of representing the mystical dimension of our triangulation, right? But there's some deep connection between this kind of knowing in Dialogos and a metanoia and a loving that, right, that again, and this is another reason why you can't do you can't do love. That's ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. You're neither purely passive, that's heteronymous. You're neither purely active, that's autonomous. You're participatory. You can set up the conditions, but it has to take on a life of its own, or it's not love. And so that'll be from when I hear that, I hear love. I hear the right in the Platonic sense. Is that fair to what you said?
Oh, deeply.
Okay.
Oh, deeply. Oh, deeply. Yeah. Yeah, it's a love. Yeah, it's a love that it's a love I feel. It's a love that we enact. It's a love that's revealed as the thing that's been there the whole time drawing in. It's it's it seems like love all the way down, right? This place where love and truth like revealed like a deep wettedness in that
Yeah.
sense for sure. Yeah.
But for me, and I mean, here I'm thinking of the Sufi tradition. That's where I know it most prominently, right? The mystical realization and the dialogical love to the between the lover and the beloved. Those are bound, like those are inseparable. Those are inseparable. I'd like to hear what Zevi has to say about that.
Yeah, I can back that point up. There's, I mean, I think beyond this is definitely true in the Sufi tradition. I think it's true in the Western mystical traditions, in a very pronounced way, for a very specific reason. There's one biblical text, the book which is the Song of Songs, the Song of
Right.
Solomon,
Right.
which gets taken up and read allegorically very early on by first Jews and Christians and then later by Muslims. And the relationship there between the two lovers is read explicitly as the relationship between God and humanity. Um, it's often, to be fair and not whitewash it, it's often read ethnocentrically. So it's between God and the ecclesia of the church, or it's between God and Knesset Yisrael, or
Right.
between. But I mean, we can try do one. I think we can try do better than the mystic. That's my personal belief when it comes to mysticism, where it's the relationship between God and humanity as a whole. So and I think that's it's so clear that the dialogue that happens in a loving relationship, where we both are able to, there's a paradox that happens where we both are able to become fully ourselves only in true relationship, where we have the other to afford ourselves to be
Yeah.
expressed
Yeah.
outwards, and we also feel united with the lover is a very common typical experience. And that's a paradox, because we're both fully being ourselves individuation and becoming united. We should think that those things don't happen simultaneously. And I think that for that reason that became conflated and smacked right onto to the mystical. And I think at this point in the conversation, it almost is tried to talk about the relationship between the dialogical and the mystical, because they seem so inseparable. But yes, so that's definitely true of Sufism. And I don't know as much Eastern mysticism, unfortunately, as much as I do Western, but it's definitely true across the West.
It's also true in Tantra within the Eastern tradition,
Mm,
right?
mm.
Tantra uses the sexual relationship as a way of trying to disclose the divine. Gentlemen, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to be the one that's going to have to bring this to a close today. I have, but
So
I
good.
think we have we did a lot of richness together. I'm going to let Guy, because he was hosting some things, but I think we've afforded a wonderful space from which Zevi can take flight in his when he helms
Absolutely.
our ship of exploration together.
Absolutely. Yes. Oh, I'm looking forward to the walking with this conversation through the week, as I find that these dialogues
Yeah.
walk with me, right? And that in precisely this is kind of exact they get so fractal. Like at some point as it goes on, it's like everything has everything else in it. And you just keep seeing that over and over and over again. And I think what that translates into for me, I notice is, and this is the way that the two of you are going to live in me and do live in me, is in some sense, um, revealing the origin from which we came close to here and got intimate with, right? In some sense is grant is in some sense it discloses the North Star for me, right? Of like it makes me more available or open or more well oriented towards the source of sense, right? Like the origin, not like the origin as not the origin as like before everything else, but the thing that always arises first and gives sense and direction. And in some way, I feel like this is maybe this also like a dojo of how to, in some sense, of operating and exercising all of that self-transcendence machinery and dying over and over and over again and being reborn in such that I can walk, and like in every place that I am, there's a deeper sense of cohesiveness and sense and direction to my life, right? Yeah. So thank you. Oh,
Thank you so much. And thank you, Zevi, too.